And he said we were flying by the seat of our pants. This is because we believe there's a system for doing missions where we raise 2-year support. We go to churches and we ask for money. And then once we've made enough money to make sure that we're secure and taken care of for 2 years, then we can go. We should be focused on God 100%. God says, drop your crap and go tomorrow. You better drop your stuff and go. It's not something where we should say, but the systems of the world are this. If you're like me, you have a heart for missions and may have already done some missions work yourself. But you also see some huge issues in the way missions are being done. Like, why are we still sending out monthly newsletters in a digital age when technology allows for instant updates in the palm of your hand? Or why are we convinced that we need to raise 2-year support before going when all 12 disciples dropped what they were doing and walked away? Or why are we allowing denominations to decide who can and cannot go do what God is calling them to do just because of things they've done in their past? And at what point did we brand following Christ to be a life of scarcity and sacrifice when it's truly a life of abundance and privilege? These are some of the glaring questions in the missions world today. And Watch Missions Live is here to reshape the way you see missions. It's time for missionaries to rise up, create a shift in perspective, a change, a revolution in the way things are done, and give you the real story, one of abundance, fulfillment, and privilege. My name is Aaron Jennings, and welcome to Watch Missions Live. The way it ought to be. Missionaries should be able to drive a nice car, buy a nice house, eat out at a nice place, get dessert if they want to, while still following God's call in their life without having to worry about what people are going to think about it or taking their support away. That's the way it ought to be. Okay, this says the way it ought to be because this is the way it should be. This is the way our culture should see missions work. This is the way our culture should treat missions work and missions people and pastors. They have the most important job in the world. They shouldn't have to worry about people judging or taking away from them. It should be understood that all money comes from God. All gifts come from God. If our God has an endless supply of everything, then if he gives a missionary or a pastor a $500,000 house and a $200,000 car, that does not mean that some country is not going to eat, because our God can do both. So it ought to be that missionaries, pastors, everybody should be allowed and understood that if they're eating out, they can still be doing God's work, and there's enough to go around. 2, donors should give without restriction because God told them to give or not give. God doesn't tell us to give to everybody. We have literally walked past people that needed things, and then God stopped us right after them to help someone else. And I guarantee you there's been times where we have stopped to help someone when God didn't tell us to do it. God wanted us to go over here, and we stopped along the way to do something that we saw. There's a big shift in perspective when you start seeing that you need to put God first and where he's calling, no matter what. Sometimes that's not giving to certain ministries, not because you don't think, but because God hasn't prompted you to. And donors should be giving without restriction because God has told you to give his money, what he gave to you, to them. And if God's not telling you to, then don't give. But don't give with this idea that if you give, then you should keep an eye on them to make sure that they're using your money wisely. Number 3, donors and missionaries both should know and understand God gave you the money. It came to them from God. Only they are accountable to God for what they do with it. Number 4, God's call on each individual should be followed as God is leading them, not by the systems of man that we created to be the most effective and secure way of doing missions work. I say this because we had a missions organization tell us we were flying by the seat of our pants because we were dropping everything and we were going to go when God told us to go. They said we needed to raise 2 years support, and then we needed to have their insurance and the umbrella of protection under their sending organization. And I didn't argue with them. I said, hey, I'm not saying that this is wrong, but I'm saying that God has called us to go help this guy right there at the end of the month, and we're going. And he said we were flying by the seat of our pants. This is because we believe there's a system for doing missions where we raise 2-year support. We go to churches and we ask for money. And then once we've made enough money to make sure that we're secure and taken care of for 2 years, then we can go. We should be focused on God 100%. God says, drop your crap and go tomorrow. You better drop your stuff and go. It's not something where we should say, but the systems of the world are this. We should be focused on God 100% in the missions as God is calling you. If he's calling you to raise money for 2 years and then go, great, do it. Absolutely, put him first. But that should not be the accepted and only way to do it. If God tells you to drop your stuff tomorrow, you better be going. If he tells you to raise support, you better be going. It ought to be that we are supporting each individual person as God is calling them, and we are supporting them and going with them so they know they're loved and they have the support, and they know, even if it's support of praying and whatever it is, but we should be going with each person as God is leading them. Hey, thank you for your time. Please remember to rate and subscribe. After being a full-time missionary, I got tired of people looking at me like it must be really hard to do what you do. And they'd say things like, I'd love to be able to do something like that, but insert excuse. When the real reason was because they saw what we were doing as a sacrifice. That to do missions work, they would have to give up everything. That quite honestly was forcing them to do things they didn't like, for people they couldn't stand, so they could afford things that they didn't need. The truth is, as full-time missionaries, it was one of the few times in my life when I was truly fulfilled. It was the closest to God I'd ever been. Debt-free, not stressed, and living the life of adventure I'd always wanted. If you too believe that it's time for a change, then head over to watchmissionslive.com and join the revolution.